Welcome to White Women Wake Up, the podcast where we, two women from different generations, come together for real, unfiltered conversations about awakening to our cultural biases. I'm Karen.
And I'm Janelle.
And we're here to explore how we, as white women, can learn from one another, unlearn harmful patterns, and create new ways of being in this world without shame, just growth.
Welcome.
Welcome, Janelle. Hey.
Sure.
I think I'm kind of leading today, huh?
Yeah, go for it. Lead to our second episode.
Yay. So I kind of wanted to recap some of the things we talked about on our first episode.
Great.
And one was hard conversations. So I kind of tasked us with noticing this week if we had any hard conversations and how we kind of react to that.
Okay.
How about you?
So I'm going to be honest, everyone, and that's what we're about. Honest, authenticity. I had a terrible cold all week, so I pretty much did not leave my house. So I didn't really interact with a lot of people to have some tough conversations. So I failed the assignment, I guess.
Oh, that's okay. We're not into shaming. So
Thank you. You're right. I didn't fail. I just didn't get a chance to do the assignment.
to think about it.
Great. That's a better perspective.
So I kind of, after we tasked ourselves to pay attention to how we are with hard conversations, I actually kind of noticed, and it's not like I haven't noticed before. I mean, I think a lot of what we're talking about might not be new to any of us. It's just awakening and making us intentionally aware. And so I noticed when I had to jump into harder conversations or conversations where I had to speak into something or confront someone, I really love to avoid. So I kind of figured out how could I avoid the conversation, or I circle. I noticed that, like, I don't go straight to the conversation. So this week, as I was jumping into a couple tough conversations, I realized to have these conversations actually take some courage. And so, and they turned out fine. I mean, that's the funny thing about these conversations.
Do you have examples of the
Well,
conversations?
I don't know. They're kind of dumb because they're not really that hard of conversations. One is I had to kind of talk to a bank, and the other is I had to talk about a reservation I had. But I was kind of reluctant because I had to kind of make a request, and I wanted to skirt around these requests. And I realized I just needed to call. I needed to use exact language. I needed to be specific. And anyways, it was just interesting. And I realized, you know what? The reality is it just takes courage. And so I think one of the things that you and I are talking a lot about, and we've discussed, hence the reason for this podcast, is because these conversations are difficult and we don't want to just naturally jump into them.
Okay, so for context, this week, you didn't have hard conversations like with family about politics or race or things like that. So you're just working on getting through hard conversations in general, right? Okay, that's a good step. I think that's a really good first step because some of these conversations that we're asking of ourselves, asking of our audience to do are a little even harder than some, like you said, tough conversations like talking to a bank or asking about reservations, which I get that. My generation is notorious for hating to get on the phone and talking and making appointments for things. So we also have our own kind of barriers to tough conversations as well. So I think that's a good stepping stone that you're talking about. You didn't ask people to immediately go have a hard conversation if they're ready for it about race, about patriarchy, about our cultural biases. You just asked people to kind of slowly point out what's difficult for them in hard conversations in general.
Yes.
Love that.
Yeah. Thanks for clarifying that. Thank you. And thank you for not shaming me because it is interesting. Like, why are we avoiding hard conversations? These, what we're asking for us in this time, in this White Women Wake Up, is that we are willing to have the courage and the patience and kind of the grace with each other so that we can actually begin to grow.
Well, stepping back too, I also think what we're asking ourselves to do is not really what are we doing in these type of conversations, but like, why are these conversations tough? And so what's interesting, because you and I did talk about this earlier this week about like the bank or the reservation for the hotel that we're going to. We're going on a little spa vacation this weekend, a little girls' weekend. But why those conversations are tough is because we've had some tough times in life. So we've had some moments where money might not have been always available, or there's health issues, just a lot of things that you feel shame around. And so I think that's ultimately what we decided is the fear of these tough conversations comes around shame and comes around guilt and feeling bad. And so expecting negative outcomes. I think that's what we really talked about, is really kind of what creates the avoidance for these conversations, whether, again, it be talking to the bank or talking to your aunt about politics, whatever it be. It's shame and defensive-ness is the fears that come up.
Yeah, I agree. I think also like your word of defensiveness is really good. So anyways, I realized stepping into those conversations, and they were hard for me. We're all different. Everyone has different levels of hard. It takes courage. And afterwards, now, fortunately, things ended up being nice conversations, and people ended up being really genuinely nice. Well, isn't that a funny word? Like, that's another thing we need to talk about, is why do we need people to be nice? But that's another story. Anyways, but genuinely, it did make me think stepping into hard conversations does take courage. It is uncomfortable. It isn't always easy. It's easier to avoid. It's easier to use circular language because we're trying to kind of pad it and frame it in a way that we think someone would feel better about, when in fact, maybe just having the courage to have the conversation makes sense. So I'm going to really keep working on that.
Love it.
I think being intentional was a good thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so framing again, back to our previous episode, because this is all about learning and all about curiosity. You and I are both these crazy curiosity places. And I also, forgive me for those of you who have been on this journey for a really long time. I'm realizing as I'm doing more and more reading that I have so much to learn. And so I hope each of you will walk alongside this kind of learning phase. And one of the things I realize that might keep me from learning, and maybe this is the same with you all, is vocabulary around things. And so there's a couple words that we're going to hear a lot, and I'm not going to bring everything up, right? Because there's a lot of vocabulary, but I think each episode we're going to kind of just bring in new words. And so this is a basic word, but it's the acronym BIPOC, and it means Black, Indigenous, Persons of Color. And because Janelle and I committed to doing a little research behind when we bring something up, I learned that it was coined in around 2013, but it only became really used in around 2020 with a lot of the George Floyd murder and protest. And I actually think it's interesting. I'm going to be curious as we move farther into this conversation, if it actually is still, it's going to be a little bit of a limited acronym. But why it became important is Black persons, Indigenous persons, kind of wanted to be more specific and not just lumped in to the language of person of color. So I wouldn't be surprised if later on we might add brown persons or other language sets, or to broaden it, because I do think this whole conversation is around meeting people and where they're at. And so anyways, but if you hear the word BIPOC, you now know what that acronym means, and you can join in the conversation. The other word that I know I'm going to talk about a little bit when I bring up my subject is location. And this was weird for me initially when I heard the word location because it doesn't make sense. Like I'm used to someone saying, oh, the location of a hotel or something like that. But when I'm in conversations around race and gender, location is actually a really important word because it's referring to my personal location. And my personal location, I'll give you an example, would be I'm white, I'm middle-aged, or I guess probably getting closer to senior now, but I'm white, I'm middle-aged, I grew up in a Protestant family, I live in the Northwest, I'm educated, I've gone to college, I have my master's, so it's kind of this space I take up in the world. It's my location.
I have not heard of that term before. So this is a new one you're bringing to me, which I love.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Because it does help when each of us look at our location from individual standpoints. We can then kind of understand our story a little bit better.
Well, and what I love about that word versus I think privilege is a word that's been thrown around a lot. And privilege is still an important word and important for us to understand. But I think what you're describing, what location means in this sense, is it kind of gives more nuance to different privileges. Because I think some of the reason that privilege has been hard, especially for white people, is because there's a lot of white people who are like, hey, I don't have... I don't have economic privilege. I don't have educational privilege. And so there are a lot of subsets of privilege that don't describe all white people. And so I think what is really great about this location term is it kind of helps maybe neutralize a term privilege just to give context to where people are showing up and identifies different areas that they might have been better off in life or different areas that give them different perspectives in life. So I that's a really interesting
and I
term.
Think a lot of this conversation has to do with people want to be noticed. They want to be heard and they want it. We all do. White women, Black women, brown women, Asian women, we all want to be validated. And so the word location is a nice word. So we will be using that in our podcast.
Perfect.
Okay. And then again, Janelle, I don't know if in the last episode you felt like you got to talk enough about performative activism.
I mean, performative activism is one of those really deep dive topics that you're right. We just scratched the surface on. I know there's a lot of great things we want to bring up this week, so I won't really dig too much into it. But again, we will post more information on our website about it to give everyone a little bit more context. Just as a reminder, performative activism refers to engaging in what can be labeled as superficial actions to support social justice causes without taking really meaningful steps for change. So it really more serves as like an activist self-image rather than the cause itself. And typically this is something that most often white women frequently center themselves in this topic. And so what I used last time, the examples were the black box on Instagram for Black Lives Matter, which was really just an easy thing to post to say, hey, I'm with you, but no actual action around it. Or more recently, blue bracelets kind of had come up as a theme to really show support for, BIPOC women. And it doesn't show actual action behind it. And so again, but I'm sure we will get into plenty of topics about performative activism as we continue our podcast, because I'm sure there'll be updated news sources about stuff.
So one of the things I like about what you just said is it's not action. It's an action, but it's not an action followed up. So when we volunteer and we do certain things, those are actual actions, right? But when we do something that doesn't really take a commitment on our part, it just shows something that would be more labeled performative action.
Exactly. So some of the definitions that I really liked were it's symbolic rather than substantive.
Okay.
Substantive. Sorry, struggling. Again, this cold has kind of knocked me out this week. But, or things like it's superficial and it's not really meaningful and it doesn't create real change. So I think those are the big things. It doesn't, like when taking actions, again, they're all well-meaning, like everything is very well-meaning, but if it's not creating real change, then maybe think of different ways that you can kind of pursue how you want to help.
Yeah.
I have a really interesting story about that, but I know you want to.
No, go for it.
Do you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't want to take up, but this is something that happened recently. And I've recently this week, and it's on TikTok, and you guys will find that I deep dive into a lot of TikTok things. But there has been a call for a little town in Alabama called Coleman, Alabama. And according to the citizens of Coleman, Alabama, it is like a hallmark, picturesque town that they're trying to make into a very Christmassy town. And they have this like Christmas village, this Christmas, market that they're trying to get off the ground. And so a lot of young people posted on TikTok about how amazing this town is, like, come visit. And there became a lot of backlash because Coleman is listed as one of the Sundown towns. And for anyone that doesn't know what a sundown town is, a sundown town are mostly found in the South, but essentially they're towns that people of color should not find themselves in any time after the sun goes down. Basically, there's a history of extreme racism, extreme violence. They're just not good places to be. And so Coleman is listed as one of those towns. And so where this got interesting on TikTok is two very well-meaning white people, one white boy, but one white woman, and I'll focus more on her, very well-meaning, got on the app and was very frustrated by people calling her town a sundown town. And she, again, said, hey, any Black person, I will hold your hand at the market. Come with me. And she got a lot of backlash, and she was very frustrated by that backlash. But I think it's a perfect example of not taking the time to sit and listen to others about learned experiences. And also it's about, again, a superficial action. So like her calling for, and I know it was well-meaning, calling for, I'll hold your hand, I'll invite you, I'll come, is not going to create meaningful change for that town. There are bigger things that need to happen to break through that systematic racism that is happening in that small town that literally has it listed as a place that no one of color should visit. And where I was proud of this girl, sorry, jumping in, is she did get on and she apologized. She still was a little confused by how her words got misunderstood. And so again, it really showed that she was so well-meaning in this, that she was so intentional with her actions, but not understanding how those actions are actually harmful. So
how is that performative? The saying, I will hold your hand, was the performative act.
So the performative part is, and so this goes back to superficial actions and like things that don't create real change, is in her mind, that felt like an action. So again, wearing a blue bracelet or putting on a black square feels like an actionable step. But the key thing here is it's not creating meaningful change. It's still superficial actions. So the superficial action of holding someone's hand is not going to change the racism in the town, is the systemic racism in the town. And it is a great, meaningful gesture. And again, I even went on and I never comment on people's TikToks, but I comment on hers. And I told her that, it took a lot of courage for her to apologize and recognize, she had talked to some friends and kind of recognized where her speech might have offended others. And so that's a big step. But it just goes back to our well-meaningness. Yeah. It can kind of actually sometimes be more harmful than good. And so we need to kind of take a look.
And I think one of the whole reasons we're having this conversation is because then it also creates paralysis. It also creates canceling.
Yeah.
So for example, she didn't do it right. She jumped in, she said this thing, and then she gets kind of canceled for saying that. And so then we don't grow. We're not growing. And so this is a good example. So what could she made the comment, she jumped in. What could she have done differently? I mean,
yeah, that's a great question. I think in something like this, where it is so embedded in her city, and again, I'm not an expert, but I think the first thing would be is invite people of color to even be on the board with your Christmas market to help support that. But I think the bigger thing is honestly just having conversations with your peers. And that's what we're trying to do too here is we know our biggest peers are the ones that we talk to every day, the ones that look like us, the ones that have our skin color, and we can make the difference within our community.
Are all white, how is she going to know that she did something that could be like this is a good thing to unpack, because part of us being together is so that we could unpack things as a community so that we jump into the conversations, because if we feel canceled and we feel shamed, we won't have the conversations.
Yeah, going back to your heart.
And so this young person, yes, she was in some ways allyship because she said, I'll walk alongside you. But the bigger issue is that this town is not safe at night.
Yeah.
And so, and the other issue, if I hear you correctly, that maybe that she could have worked on is, I need to be willing to hear your backlash.
Yeah.
I need to be willing to sit into the uncomfortability that, wow, I didn't realize my town isn't safe.
Yes.
That makes me that really concerns me.
Exactly.
I'm now aware of it. What can we do towards that?
Yeah, a couple things there. I think one, that's a great example of a first step of what she should do, and she did do, which is really great kind of thing. I think the second thing to note here, though, is, as I said before, this is a much larger issue than one person can accomplish. This is going to take years and years of breaking down systematic racism to make Coleman an acceptable town for people of color. So I'm not even talking about or expecting that this Christmas market would change in the next year or two. But what I was saying about having conversations with people is she's now been awakened to different perspectives and ways that she can start learning. And so I think examples like listening to our podcast is a great example. Learning, doing the research, figuring things out of, what does better allyship look like? And there's a lot of resources. And I know you had a list of books too that you wanted to talk about.
You know what? It's so funny because we are going to try to keep this podcast at a commute level that maybe this stems into a second one. So what I'm also hearing that from so who cares about not who cares, but mine can be another episode. But because I really kind of want to unpack this a little bit, because I think if we don't have this discussion, we as white people are going to kind of either keep quiet, or maybe we're not going to feel heard, or there's just going to be the conversation isn't going to be thought out through. So I want to talk.
Can you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah. Because I said keep quiet or we're not going to be heard. But I think what's interesting about this situation is because of her whiteness, she probably didn't even know it was dangerous at night. Okay, that's kind of us in our locale, right? We're in our location. Our location is it's majority we're majority white people, or the people we're hanging out with are white. So she probably didn't even know it was not safe. Or maybe she knew it was not safe from a female perspective, and that's her location as a female, but as a white person, that had not occurred to her. So I think that this was an interesting topic because as a majority culture, I grew up as a white person in a majority white community. I didn't think of perspectives outside of myself. Okay, so
I don't think that's uncommon either.
And maybe not. And so she jumped in. And she was well-meaning because she said, hey, I'll protect you. Me and my friends, we're good people. We'll protect you. But you're right. it's now what? It's now what? So the thing is, she's been awakened. You know, if we're
Yep.
going to say wake up here, she's been woken up to the fact that her town is not safe at night for Black people or people of color. So now what? Now
Yep.
what? And we think part of the now what, or the start, because this is where all of us are at, is the start would be to simply listen. Listen to persons of color and their outcry of why we feel, in this particular case, in this story, why we feel our town has not been safe.
I would say 2 steps. I would say listen for sure. First is listen. But second thing is educate yourself. And so this is where we've also talked about it. We have a bunch of books that we can list. I know you have a great book offering. I have a great book offering of just places to get started.
Yeah.
And where to kind of, because I think those are the big things. And once you start educating yourself, you feel more confident in these conversations and having conversations with your peers and starting to look at this stuff. But I would say listen and educate.
Yeah. So, and I think number one, like, and this is funny because this is what I was going to talk about, but we can do this in the next episode, is this space when you start listening of being open and not defensive. We're going to start, as white people, we start hearing things that we're like, wait, but I didn't mean that. I didn't mean that. But the truth is, it's a bigger systemic issue that we have been a part of and privileged towards. So anyways, wow, Janelle, I didn't to talk about unscripted. I had a whole thing to talk about.
I know. I told you. I told you it might derail us a little bit, but
it's okay.
But this is great. These are great conversations.
Because we want to have this conversation. We want to take the time to unpack this conversation because we don't want to cancel and we don't want to shame. We want to figure out how we can step in and actually make change.
And we also want to show our listeners that these raw, authentic conversations are really good to have and break down and understand kind of what's happening and where I fit into the piece. And so, yeah, it was just a really great example. But no, this was a great conversation. I can't wait to hear what you have for us next time.
We love feedback. We're going to try to walk the talk. That's the way it's said. In that, if we're not going to police your comments. And so that may be good, that may be hard, but we want feedback and we want to learn. I really want to learn because I'm like this young lady. I might have said, hey, I'll hold your hand. And I think it's well-meaning, but it may need more. Yeah. And so thank God she apologized and we need to just move forward.
Well, and I think that's a great point. I think we always need more. So please, if you have comments, questions, we want to engage with you. This is going to be an open community. And as we continue this journey, we'll build out more ways to even connect together too. So be on the lookout for that. Anyways, thank you so much for joining us today on White Women Wake Up. We hope today's conversation sparked some reflection and inspired you to engage with the world in a new and more thoughtful ways. Remember, this journey is just as much about learning, unlearning, and showing up with authenticity. If you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe, leave a review, connect with us on social media. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep waking up.
Keep waking up.